I'm very, very pleased to be able to introduce to you our next speaker. If you haven't heard of the Global Peace Index, get ready. This is really an incredible tool, very unique and creative tool given to us in this time. So our next speaker is Ms. Camilla Schippa, who is the director of Institute for Economics and Peace. She's from Australia. She's the Institute for Economics and Peace produces the Global Peace Index. She has over 15 years of professional experience in building new initiatives for development and peace, guiding public and private partnerships, leading teams, and cooperating vast public outreach efforts. Her first-hand experience is in intergovernmental organizations, philanthropic strategy, and academic research. Camilla is also a member of numerous expert groups, including the UN's Expert Reference Group for the Global Consultation on Conflict, Violence, and Disaster in the post-2015 Development Agenda. Her career has been instrumental in creating many pivotal partnerships between foundations, civil society, and the private sector in Southeast Asia. Let's welcome Ms. Camilla Schippa.
Thank you. Thank you for that generous introduction, and thank you for the organizers for inviting me here today, and to all of you to be still here resisting this long day of speeches. I would like to start my presentation today by getting us to reflect on a question. We're here at a peace conference, and we use the word peace commonly in our languages. Yet, what do we really know about peace? Peace is not germane to any university courses worldwide that I've been able to identify. There are profound works on the literature of peace, yet there's no peace literature course in any university. We know that peace and economics are strongly interrelated, yet I haven't been able to find a chair in peace economics. Now, there has been a multiplication of peace and conflict centers at universities around the world. But if you look at the curricula closely, what they are studying is conflict. We keep on focusing on the negative, what we don't want. Very little focus on what we do actually want. I worked at the United Nations for over a decade. I don't remember one single meeting discussing peace, but numerous, endless meetings talking about conflict, why countries fall into conflict, how to help them recover after conflict. Now think about the medical science. Of course, the cure of disease is important. Of course, we need to study cancer and how to cure cancer. But it wasn't until the medical science actually focused on the healthy body that we learned what we need to do to keep healthy, good diet and exercise. In the same way, the study of peace needs to accompany the study of conflict. Next slide, please. So the Institute for Economics and Peace, where I work, focuses on measuring peace. Our focus is to strip peace of its utopian connotation to really make it a tangible measure, an achievable policy objective for governments. Without measurement, in fact, how do we know whether our actions are helping or hindering the achievement of our goals? In order to measure peace, next slide please, we need to define it. And while people will not agree on a definition of peace, the only way to measure it was to define it with what is termed by peace scientists as negative peace, the absence of violence and the absence of the fear of violence. We also want to study positive peace, and I'll talk about it a little bit later on, and how we derive to that through the measurement of the absence of violence, and so negative peace. Next slide. The Global Peace Index has been now produced for 7 years. It ranks 162 nations according to their relative states of peace, using 22 indicators, which are a mixture of both qualitative and quantitative indicators. To guarantee the independence of the index, we don't work alone. We, in fact, engage a team of experts that are independent. They're statistical and peace experts that help us define the indicators and the weights assigned to them. And then we work with another external body called the Economist Intelligence Unit to help collate and collect the data. Next slide. The 22 indicators that are used can be broadly grouped in 3 categories. 5 are measures of ongoing conflict, both internal and external to a country. 10 are measures of safety within a society, say the number of homicides or terrorist activity. And then the last 7 are measures of militarization. Next slide, please. Here is a snapshot of the state of peace in 2013. Now, why is this kind of analysis important? It's not necessarily important to show who's at the top and who's at the bottom. We pretty much know that. What it's important for is that it really gets us to understand trends. Now, we live today in an era which is more peaceful than any other in our history. Yet, what is important is that if we track peace over the past 6 years, we can see there has been a 5% deterioration. And that's what makes these type of conferences, like here today, of particular importance. Next slide, please. It can also help us look at the distribution of peace. And we can see that over the past 6 years, peace have become more dispersed. Basically, looking at this, this chart, when you look at the red line, you are seeing 2013. And you can see there's a longer tail, which basically indicates that the country that was least peaceful in 2013 was less peaceful than the country that was the least in 2008. So things are getting slightly worse. The index can also show why this deterioration, in fact, is driven by a worsening in the internal indicators. So externally, countries are doing fine, but internally, we have seen more conflict. In fact, this is the indicator that deteriorated the most. And you can see the difference between 2007, 37,000 deaths from internal conflict, and 2012, 178,000, driven by conflicts such as Libya and Syria. Now, what I've shown so far, which is the Global Peace Index, which is an analysis of trends in peace, can tell us whether there's been a short-term progress or deterioration in peace. But on its own, doesn't tell us anything about what countries need to do to sustain peace in the long term. However, it is thanks to the vast amount of data that we have been able to collect by developing the Global Peace Index that we have been able, for the first time, to empirically derive what are the characteristics, the structures, the attitudes, the institutions that nations need in order to sustain peace in the long term. We've called this analysis the pillars of peace. And what we have done is that we have analyzed over 4,700 variables, looking at an incredible number of different aspects. And from here, we have been able to derive a taxonomy of the elements that sustain peace, which is statistically based. Next slide, please. And here it is. We're calling it the pillars of peace. It looks like a flower. It's got all those lines. Before I go through each one of them, what do the lines represent? Each of those elements is closely interrelated. They cannot exist, they cannot sustain peace by themselves. It's like a brick wall. This is what the stats are showing us. So think about a brick wall. If you take out just one brick, the whole structure is weakened. It's the same with this. What are the structures? Starting from the top and going clockwise, well-functioning government, which is looking both at efficiency and the rule of law, as well as how the government is open and communicative with the citizens. Equitable distribution of resources, both financial as well as health and education. Free flow of information in a society. A sound business environment. High levels of human capital, really meaning the stock of knowledge of the population, the citizenry. Acceptance of the rights of others, very pertinent to the discussions that you're having here today. This is really looking at the levels of tolerance of the other, linguistic, ethnic, religious, etc. Low levels of corruption, and good relations with neighbors. In here meant as a neighboring state, a neighboring province, etc. This approach really shows that positive peace is multidimensional. So this is what we need to achieve positive peace, to have to focus on in countries if we want them to maintain the levels of peace or indeed come out of violence and progress. Next slide, please. Again here, a quick look. We can track, we can measure based on all the indicators that make up each of the pillars, the strength of those institutions in various countries. What is actually important to me on this map is, I don't know if you can see the amount of gray. Gray means no data. Coming back to my first point, for the countries where we need it the most, we don't have the information, we don't have the data, it's not accessible. We do not measure what we want, we do not measure what we need, which is what I'm doing with the UN, is trying to call for more and better data collection so that we can further analyze. What happens when you put negative peace and positive peace together? You would think that all the countries would align along that red line, if you understand scatter plots. However, we can see that there are countries that are either above the red line or below, what we call positive peace deficit, countries which seem to have a higher level of peace than their structures would allow for, or under the red line, a surplus. So countries that seem to have those institutions, as we have measured them, but are living in violence. Why is that? What does that tell us? Well, we've also looked at this, next slide please, over time. And here is the movement of countries over 6 years. On the top were those countries that didn't have the structures, or the structures weren't as developed as the level of peace. What's happened? All those red lines, they have fallen into violence. The bigger fallers were the ones that have biggest positive peace deficit: Syria, Rwanda, Madagascar, and Egypt. Now, since I have 3 minutes left, I'm going to go on to a separate and a different area of our work, and I'm going to be very brief, but I thought I wanted to mention this because you might find it of interest. The Institute for Economics and Peace has developed a methodology to measure the cost of violence to our world economy. Measure violence as a discrete industry, just like we do with education, like we do with health, like we do with agriculture. Just to give a sense of how much of the economic pie the world is dedicated to dealing with the consequences and with prevention of violence. Now, keep in mind that this study is incredibly conservative because we have only counted direct costs. So let's say somebody puts fire to a school. We're only counting the money that it would cost to rebuild that school. We're not counting the money of the economic pie lost by lost wages of the teachers, for example. So conservative in that sense, and conservative also in the sense that we have only counted what is possible to count, and we know there's many other items that we haven't been able to count. What have we come up with? Estimated cost of violence to the world today is $9.46 trillion. In other words, 11% of gross world product in 2012. That equals, just to put it in perspective, because trillions are big numbers, $25 billion a day. Now, we are not saying that we don't need to spend money on containing violence. Of course we need police, of course we need jails, but what is the right amount? Violence containment expenditure is not productive, doesn't give us the same return on investment that building a school would. So should we spend so much on it? If we just compare it to other industries, basically violence containment is bigger than the world airline industry, the world tourism industry, and the world agriculture sector put together. And here is my last slide. I've said it's not very productive. Could we convince policymakers to look at trying to reduce violence containment expenditure, even by a small percentage, and then very importantly, invest that saving into those pillars of peace that I showed before, the elements that help build peace in a society: education, health, distribution of resources, anti-corruption measures. That in turn would reduce violence, which in turn would reduce violence containment expenditure and initiate what we are calling a virtuous cycle of reducing violence and violence containment spending, and we think everybody would benefit from that. Thank you very much. That's mine.
Whoa. Thank you very much. That felt like a little taste, and I want more. Very, very interesting. Let's give Miss Camilla Schippa another round of applause. Very, very interesting, especially as she started out of how there's always such a focus on conflict and not a focus on peace. And that last section was extremely interesting also. I felt like maybe your organization needs to have a display so that we can take more time and read and understand it more deeply. Thank you.